I'm going to be reading to you the end of Chapter 10 of Nightmare Mountain by Kehret. So part 2 of Chapter 10. And it starts on page 119 if you're following along with me in the book. No, every inch of her body cried out in protest. She had struggled too hard to survive the avalanche. She was too proud of the fact that she had kept herself and Glendon alive through the long cold night. She wouldn't give up now. She wouldn't. She'd save herself somehow, and she would save Glendon too. But how? How could she hope to escape when she was so tired and sore and hungry? If only there was someone to help her. She leaned against the side of the truck and closed her eyes. There was no one nearby except Glendon, and he was in worse shape than she was. She wondered how he and Bucky were doing up there. Good old Bucky. Her eyes opened and she stood up straight. Bucky was a big, strong dog, and he was fond of her. Would he be loyal enough to defend her if necessary? Bucky minded well because of his obedience training. Would he attack someone on command? Molly remembered the gun. He didn't have it in his hand today, but he wore a heavy jacket. Maybe the gun was in his pocket. Even Bucky's strength was no match for a gun, and she was sure this man would shoot if necessary. She hesitated. She didn't want to endanger Bucky's life, but what were her choices? If she didn't take the risk, she and Glendon were goners for sure. Molly walked toward the man. He had not yet caught one of the llamas. Each time he got a few feet from one of them, he rushed forward with the rope, and the animal would prance away. It would be lots faster if you used Bucky to herd those llamas, she said. Who? Bucky, the dog. He's trained as a sheepdog. Where is he? There was an edge to his voice, and she could tell he was frustrated by his inability to catch the llama. He's up on the mountain with Glendon. Do you want me to go get him? He stopped stalking the llama and looked at her. How did the dog get up there, he said. He wasn't up there yesterday. I did make it down off the mountain yesterday, like I said. Only the sheriff's line was busy and I couldn't wait because Glendon was still buried in the snow. Bucky went back up with me. He's the one who found where Glendon was buried. He could smell Glendon under the snow. No kidding. He's a smart dog, Molly said, and he knows how to work the llamas. All right, go get him. But I warn you, you try anything funny and you'll wish you hadn't. Molly trudged up the path, not at all sure she could make it to the lift. She had never felt so tired in her life. Tired and discouraged. She hated this mountain. She loathed the ranch and the snow, and most of all, the man with the gun. She even resented Uncle Phil for leaving her to cope with all of this alone. Keep going, she told herself. Right now, Bucky is your only hope. Wearily, she climbed on the lift and started the motor. As the lift rose, she looked down and was struck by the beauty of the scene. The fence posts were wearing caps of snow. They marched along the white fields. On the other side of the house, the icy limbs of the Christmas trees sparkled in the early morning sun. With a little shock of surprise, Molly realized she wasn't scared. She had ridden the lift so many times that it no longer bothered her to look down. Something good comes of everything, her mother always said, and maybe out of all this terror and pain she would at least be cured of her fear of heights. Bucky was waiting at the top, tail wagging. He must have heard the lift coming. Good Bucky, she said, and she rubbed his ears. She made her way to where Glendon lay in the snow. His face was pale and his lips had a bluish color that frightened her. When she left him, it was still quite dark. Now in the bright daylight, he looked sicker than she remembered. Quickly she told him what had happened and what her plan was. I don't know if it will work, she said. If nobody has come for you in an hour, you'd better drag yourself to the lift, get down, and somehow get to the house and call for help. Glendon's eyes filled with tears, and Molly realized he didn't think he could make it. Your mother is still alive, she said. She made it, and you will too. Glendon blinked away the tears. Mother didn't die? She didn't die, and you won't either, Molly said. She knew she was convincing herself as well as Glendon. We aren't going to let that rotten thief get the best of us. That rotten thief, Glendon said, is my uncle. Molly was too shocked to answer. If you make it and I don't, Glendon said, tell Dad that his brother stole the llamas. Your own uncle tried to kill you? Said Molly. Glendon nodded. Uncle Crane. Well, your Uncle Crane isn't going to get away with it, Molly said. But you may have to help yourself no matter how much it hurts or how hard it is. Even when your dad gets home, he won't know how to look for you up here. If I don't make it, you must get yourself to the lift and go down. Glendon nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. Molly took a deep breath and turned away from him. Come on, Bucky, she said. You're going with me this time. Molly? She looked back. Good luck, he said, and I'm sorry for how I acted. You're not like Gladys at all. You aren't a bit like Gladys. Thanks. She still didn't know who Gladys was, but there was no time to find out now. If she didn't get back down with Bucky soon, Crane would come looking for them, and when he found them, he wouldn't waste time talking. She and Bucky rode down together. When they reached the lower pasture, she sent the lift back up to the top. That way it would be there if Glendon needed it. She headed down the path and saw that Crane had succeeded in getting one of the llamas on the truck. He had roped another one too, but he couldn't make the animal move toward the truck. It was tugging and pulling on the rope like a bucking bronco. Could a nice man like Uncle Phil have a creep like Crane for a brother? As she looked at him, she knew it was true. He had the same build as Uncle Phil, and the same brown eyes. All he lacked was the beard and the smile. Bucky stopped. The fur stood up in a little ridge along his back, and a low growl came from deep in his throat. Molly put one hand on Bucky's head and stroked him. Bucky stopped growling. Molly realized that Crane was concentrating so hard on the llama he had roped that he had not heard the lift return, nor did he realize that Molly and Bucky were now walking down the path. Heel, she said softly. She started walking again, and Bucky stayed beside her. She kept her eyes on Crane. He still didn't notice her, but the frightened llama did. When the terrified llama saw another person approaching, it panicked and jerked harder on the rope. Crane yelled, lifted his arm, and tried to hit the llama. As his raised arm swung toward the llama's head, the frightened animal spit at him. A large green cud flew from the llama's mouth, and it hit Crane right in the face. It splattered onto his chest and into his hair. Crane jumped back, dropped his rope, and the llama ran off. If Molly had not been trying to remain unseen, she would have cheered. Cursing, Crane wiped his eyes on the sleeve of his jacket. Then he bent over, scooped up some dirt, and tried to clean his face with it. He removed his jacket and flung it on the ground. Molly walked faster, and Bucky stayed right beside her. She crouched down as they passed the truck. For a few yards, it would block her from Crane's view. She counted on his anger to help her. She knew he was furious at the llama, and he wasn't thinking of anything except getting rid of the terrible-smelling cud that had landed on him. If she took advantage of this situation, perhaps she could get away before he thought about her. In a few moments, he would probably wonder where she was and be angry at her for not returning with Bucky. Would he take the time to look for her? The lift was back at the top, so he would assume she was still up there too. Would he ride up the mountain again? Would he go looking for her, or would he give up and leave? There was no way to outguess him. If he went up the mountain, he'd realize she wasn't there. He would find Glendon alone, and there was no telling what he would do then. She glanced back over her shoulder. Crane was kneeling down, trying to clean the front of his jacket by rubbing it on the ground. Molly walked faster. The possibility of escape gave her new strength. When she reached the barn, she looked ahead at the long, empty path that led to the house. All Crane had to do was look this way, and if she were on the path to the house, he would know it. He could catch her easily. She decided not to chance it. Instead of going all the way to the house, she ducked into the barn and took Bucky with her. From the back window of the barn, she could see the lower pasture. She could see the truck. If he went up on the lift, she would see it moving and would have time to run to the house and call for help. If he didn't go after her, if he got in the truck instead and drove away, she could hide in the barn until he was on his way to town. She saw him straighten and look around. The llama had disappeared into the grove of trees on the far side of the pasture. The other llamas had followed it. Crane ran to the bottom of the lift and looked up. Molly held her breath. He turned and sprinted to the truck, started the engine, and drove away from the pasture. Molly breathed faster. Oh, he was leaving. He was so angry that he was going to leave without her. When she was positive the truck was headed her way, she moved back from the window. She kept her hand firmly on Bucky's harness to make sure he didn't run out of the barn and give away their hiding place. She heard the truck go past the barn, but it didn't seem to continue down the lane toward the gate. Instead, it headed toward the house. She stood perfectly still, straining her ears. She couldn't tell where Crane was by listening, so she walked to the front of the barn and peeked out the window that faced the house. Crane leaped out of the truck. He charged around the side of the house toward the old shed. Why was he going back there? Surely he wouldn't be looking for her. He thought she was still up on the mountain. She waited, every muscle so tense that she thought if she were forced to bend, she would snap in two. Moments later, Crane returned. He went straight to the truck, got in, and took off down the lane. She watched until he went through the gate, making the turn toward town and vanishing from her view. Then, feeling faint with relief, she left the barn and hurried to the house. She stumbled as she went up the porch steps, and she realized how weak she really was. Just a little longer, she told herself. Just keep going until you've made your phone call. Then you can collapse if you want to. She pushed open the door and went inside. She felt unreal, as if she were floating on a cloud somewhere and watching herself act out a part in a play. With effort, she made it to the kitchen and saw the sheriff's card right where she had left it, on the counter next to the telephone. She was almost giddy with exhaustion. The numbers on the card blurred slightly when she tried to read them. She blinked and looked again, willing the numbers to focus. And when they did, she picked up the receiver and held it to her ear. There was nothing. No dial tone. No sound at all. She clicked the receiver button up and down, but even as she did it, she knew it wouldn't help. That's why Crane had stopped the truck. That's why he went around the side of the house before he left. He had cut the telephone line. Crane had made sure he would have plenty of time to get away. Slowly, Molly replaced the receiver. She thought of Glendon lying alone in the snow, injured and scared. Her whole body ached with fatigue as she sank down on the kitchen chair and wept. Remember we talked about the phones earlier in another chapter? They didn't have cell phones when this book was written. And so the phone line was cut, and if that happens, then there would be no connection. And so even though they might try to get the phone to go to operate, it wouldn't, because that phone line had been cut. Oh, she's in a pickle. And I can totally understand why she is just collapsing and crying. She's so tired and things don't look good. We'll find out, won't we?